who will be delivering his talk entitled Stolen Photo, How to Spark Historical Imagination in the Age of the Always New. Professor Coleman's research and teaching focuses on the histories of capitalism, photography, and Catholicism in 20th century Latin America. He is the writer and director of Stolen Photo, a documentary film co-produced by Señal Colombia and supported by the National Film Board of Canada. He is also the author of Camera in the Garden of Eden, The Self-Forging of a Banana Republic. He is co-editor of Capitalism and the Camera and Coup d'etat in Cold War Latin America, 1964 to 1982. His articles have been published in leading journals, including the Hispanic American Historical Review, the Radical History Review, and Photography and Culture. His research has been funded by the American Council of Learned Societies, Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Fulbright Hays, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. His research and teaching have been awarded prizes from the American Historical Association and the Canadian Historical Association. With that, over to you, Professor Coleman.
Yeah, thanks so much to UTM, to James, and to the Mississauga Public Library. It's a huge honor. I'm a big believer in public libraries. The heart of a democracy, I think, is a good public library, especially now. So this thing came to me unexpectedly. I was writing a dissertation on Honduras, on the United Fruit Company. The United Fruit Company is now Chiquita Brands International. So I was doing this project on the fruit company in Honduras, and I'm reading these books, and among them is a book called Ethnicity at Work, Divided Labor on a Central American Banana Plantation by an anthropologist named Philippe Bourgois. This book is published in the late 80s. It's based on his dissertation research when he was a PhD student in anthropology. And I notice he's citing all of these internal company documents. So I'm like, okay, I've tried, every researcher I know has tried to get into the United Fruit Company archives, and they always say no. But this guy's got a bunch of internal company records. So I email him, and I say, hi, Philippe, I'm working on a dissertation. Could you send me those documents? And I promise I'll pay for the shipping. I'll digitize all of them, and I'll send high-resolution scans of these images right back to you within 7 days. That's how we did it. I sent him two, at that time it was like CD-ROMs with these high-res scans, and I chronologically ordered them, thematically ordered them, and he had them back in his hands. Among those images was this one, among those documents was this photograph, and it was on Colombia, and I was writing a dissertation on Honduras, so it sat on my hard drive. But then I did something else. I had this fancy grant to finish up writing up my dissertation from the ACLS, and so I printed out this photo, and I just taped it above my desk, and it sat there. And then, so this is the object, that's the photograph, and it was paper clipped to a memo that was in this. I can say more about how let me say how he got these documents. Okay, he was doing his field work on this plantation, banana plantation, on the border between Costa Rica and Panama. It's the early 80s, Central America's in revolution, Nicaragua's in revolution. They're trying to bring about a successful revolution in El Salvador, but getting cut down by counterinsurgency forces. And so this guy, Philippe Bourgois, he's talking to people. This old man, a watchman, tells him, hey, you like old documents? There's a warehouse full of documents there. And so he starts, after a while, he's looking at them, he's taking notes on them. He had tried to get access to these documents in New York. They said no. And then he started, depending on your perspective, he either started stealing them and slipping them into his jacket, a couple at a time, and then taking them out with him each day going on a United Fruit Company railroad car to the workers' barracks where he was staying. Or, if he didn't steal them, he liberated them from an archive of power. Whatever is the case, he took about 2 boxes worth of documents. And among those was this letter from a manager in Colombia and that photograph. So this sits up on my wall for a while. And then one day I'm done writing the dissertation for the day and I just start working on this photograph. And then I save it on my hard drive. Then I got the job here at the University of Toronto. Some colleagues invited me to participate in a workshop on U.S. imperialism and labor. I'm like, all right, yeah, that sounds fun. I've got this thing about a photograph from the 1928 strike of banana workers in Colombia. Maybe this could work. They said yes. So then I had to actually start working on sources. I had to find a way to piece together the stories, if I could, behind those 5 guys in the photo. So if you don't know, the 1928 massacre of banana workers in Colombia is this emblematic moment in Colombian history. It's been written about by Gabriel Garcia Marquez in perhaps the finest novel of the 20th century, if not the finest novel of the entire 20th century, certainly the finest Latin American novel, 100 Years of Solitude, Cien Años de Soledad. The culminating moment in the novel is the massacre of banana workers. And Garcia Marquez does this in magical realist terms, so he kills 3,000 people in the book and loads them into train cars. How many people were killed in the actual historical events? We'll get to that later. We're not sure. So for all kinds of reasons, it was important to me to think about this photo from the 1928 massacre because it's so important to Colombian history, and I think it offered us a new way to reimagine what happened back in 1928. So I started looking for sources. The first thing I do is go to the official archive that's at Harvard University in their Baker Business Library. And as you can imagine, it's an archive of progress. The United Fruit Company bringing modernity to Latin America, building hospitals, clearing forests, ridding the region of tropical diseases, building schools, draining swamps, implementing U.S. notions of races, of racial distinction between, here the caption was very blunt, the native wards versus the white wards in the hospital, recreating U.S. suburbs, again, segregated spaces, and fruit company towns across the region. The archive at Harvard has 10,000 some odd photographs from the company's operations in Latin America, some 300 on Colombia. Photographs on the 1928 strike, huge moment. They do have some. They have about 10. But this is where it's important to think historically. Those photographs document violence, but they always document violence carried out by workers. They're often labeled December 10th, 1928, December 14th, 1928. Crucial thing, though, is if you put events in chronological order, you find out that all the real violence happens on December 6th, 1928. And that's when the military opens fire on the workers who assembled in a plaza in a town called Ciénaga, waiting for what they thought was the resolution to their strike. So the official collection and the unofficial collection, the internal documents smuggled out by this anthropologist day by day, give us 2 very different readings of the 28 strike. Here's a picture from the Harvard archive, and it came with some caption like, the workers burnt down the engineering quarters in Sevilla, December 10th, 1928. This is a really important photo. Remember it if you can. We'll come back. In theories of photography, there's this notion of the optical unconscious, like the human unconscious, the thing the camera didn't quite want to capture, but captured anyway, and it kind of slips out accidentally. This is the optical unconscious of this photo, and I'll say why in about 20 minutes. So I also went looking for other sources. It turned out that the military general in charge of the operation in the Banana Zone published a memoir a year after the massacre. It's a remarkable memoir. He's very honest about all of this, and he wasn't embarrassed about what they did. He was fulfilling the law. But it turned out that it allowed me to reconstruct some of the people in the picture. Erasmo Coronel, Pedro N. del Rio, Nicanor Serrano. If you flip back to the other slides, those are the names listed in that memo by the United Fruit Company manager. I found something out. One, he narrates all of this, these events, in great detail. He publishes it just a year after the events, and then I did not expect this at all. But he narrates how the strike happens and how the massacre happens. And so the military comes up with a couple of decrees. One decree is basically public assembly, the right to public assembly is suspended. We're in a state of exception. Any group of more than 3 people is now illegal. And basically, we have the right to disperse these crowds with violence if necessary. And so he tells the story of how the workers have assembled at the Plaza in Ciénaga, waiting for the train to come with their representatives to tell them that the strike has been resolved after all these days. The military is assembled there too. They have their machine guns and everything. And this is his version of the story. And the military tells the assembled workers, hundreds of workers and their families, you have 5 minutes to disperse. If you don't disperse, we will fire on you. You have 1 minute to disperse. And then Cortes Vargas says that somebody in the crowd shouted back, we'll give you the remaining minute. And then the minute goes by, the general says, we had to fulfill the law, we had to enact the law, and we did. He says fire, the military fires on the crowd, and the people fell, the masses, he said, la masa, fell as if it were a single person. Boom. Garcia Marquez, I had no idea until I started looking at this, takes a crucial paragraph from the military general's account of the massacre and puts it straight into Cien Años de Soledad. But he changed one word. When the worker shouts back in the novel to the military leaders, we'll give you the remaining minute, in Garcia Marquez's account, the worker says, cabrones, bastards, we'll give you the remaining minute. In Garcia Marquez's account, it's as if the workers are telling the soldiers, hey, you have 1 more minute to reclaim your humanity. Don't fire it on us. The relationship between the workers and the soldiers was dynamic. And Cortes Vargas, the president of Colombia, the managers of the company, all understood it. At the beginning of the strike, for the first 2 or 3 weeks, the real problem was that the soldiers sympathized with the workers. They were all from the same banana culling zone. They had families who were workers. And the problem was that some of the soldiers actually took their guns and joined the strike with the workers. And so the solution for the military was to break that solidarity between the workers and the soldiers, and they brought in soldiers from a completely different region of Colombia that had no idea what was going on in the banana zone and would just follow orders. Okay, so looking for sources, this blew my mind. Remember the photograph? Well, Cortes Vargas, in his memoir, publishes the exact same photograph 1 year later. the same photo that that anthropologist stole or liberated from the United Fruit Company warehouse in the border between Panama and Costa Rica in the early 1980s. There's a difference, though. The penmanship is different, right, from the penmanship of the other. It's the exact same studio photo. So these guys, these 5 guys, they may not have even owned those sports coats and ties. They may have gone in photo studios back in that day, still today actually. We don't have very many photo studios anymore, do we? But you could go in and the photographer would lend you like a sports coat and a tie. So if you're, a plantation worker, you can't afford all that, so you get one. And so they may have borrowed it. I don't know. But they go in as friends, as labor leaders, a moment of solidarity perhaps. They pay whatever, a peso or 2 pesos to get their picture taken. And they're portraying themselves as they wish to be seen by others. Proud. They may have given a copy to their spouses. Fruit company manager changes the meaning of this photo. It's now a photo that's used for facial recognition. It's now a photo used to visually identify these people and eliminate them. The military, the general in charge of the operation, has the same photo. My hypothesis is that the 2, Thomas Bradshaw from the company and Carlos Cortez Vargas from the military, sat down across from each other. They said, okay, who are the 5 guys we need to get? It's this. Number 1, the first one we've got to take out, Raul Eduardo Maecha. He's the brains, the most, as the memo Thomas Bradshaw says, the most dangerous communistic leader. It's a word that doesn't exist, but Thomas Bradshaw invented it for the memo. He's the most dangerous communistic leader. We need to get him. Erasmo Coronel, we need to get him. And then the others, Nicanor Serrano, Pedro M. del Rio, the other name escapes me. Oh, it's down here somewhere. Bernardino Guerrero. The names, they both got them, even though the order is different, they both got the names exactly right. So number 1 in his is Raul Eduardo Maecha. In Thomas Bradshaw's, Maecha, I think, is number 3, but the name goes straight to Maecha, right? Okay, so weird, right? Or not weird, but this is strong evidence that the 2 were coordinating with each other. What other sources? I went to look in the Colombian newspapers. They were reporting on it daily. This is just one example from December 10th about the decree of state of exception. There were other decrees of state of exception before that. Another way to state state of exception would be like, escaping me, but there's a very easy and obvious way to say it in English. It's just not, what is the word? State of siege. Okay. Other sources. That didn't turn out very good, but the declassified U.S. government documents. So what was happening is the U.S. Consular officials are cabling Washington every day during the strike. And the tally of the number of workers killed keeps going up day by day. And so the best evidence we have for a correct estimate of the number of people killed is, I think, this memo where Jefferson Caffrey writes, the Bogota representative of the United Fruit Company told me yesterday that the total number of strikers killed by the Colombian military exceeded 1,000. In a previous memo from a few days or a week earlier, he says it was over 500. Before that, you get something like 300. Before that, 200. And it just keeps going up day by day, week by week. So I think this is like a U.S. ambassador. The U.S. company is directly involved with all this. The U.S. sends a warship off the coast of Colombia just in case they need to rescue U.S. citizens. a U.S. ambassador is not going to exaggerate the number of people killed. It doesn't serve the U.S. interests at all. If anything, this may be an estimate on the lower side. But it does give us something concrete, and it's, Gabriel Garcia Marquez's fictional version is clearly probably way more than were actually killed. But the number of killed officially in Colombia and the Colombian newspapers and according to the Colombian military was 9. 9 is a gross underestimate of the number of people killed. I'm going to go with this one. So I've already mentioned this is the key passage from Garcia Marquez. And here's the bit, cabrón escrito, les regalamos el minuto que falta. And that comes from Cortez Vargas's memoir. So after doing that research, I turned it into a chapter. It gets published in a book. And it gets published here. And I call it The Photos We Don't Get to See, Sovereignty's Archives in the 1928 Massacre of Banana Workers in Colombia. And why the photos we don't get to see? Because through that single photograph, I think it invites us to imagine, to exercise some civil imagination about all the other photos like it that must have existed, that the company had. The company was clearly using photography. It also used them. I found examples from that same collection. From Honduras, where they're labeling labor leaders, describing them in memos, sending those memos between their different divisions in Honduras, Colombia, Costa Rica, Panama, Cuba, Jamaica, Ecuador. So that's why I call it The Photos We Don't Get to See. I also like there's a certain poetic sensibility to it that I don't think Stolen Photo has. I still would fight for this title, but shorter is better if you're making a movie. It was translated and published in this book. And yeah, so then it started, this article, it started to circulate. A guy, he was a professor of history, of Latin American history at Princeton, and he starts doing a Twitter thread on the 1928 Massacre of Banana Workers leading up to the anniversary of this massacre. And he mentions my article and then starts citing it, or yeah, I guess that's still called a citation in Twitter, but he starts referencing it various times in his Twitter thread. And then after that, his followers on Twitter picked it up, and a couple of graffiti artists in Colombia read the article and then decided they wanted to put that photograph up as a mural in Santa Marta, the old banana company where the company had its headquarters in Colombia. And so here they're painting a mural based on that photograph. And they titled it, Les regalamos el minuto que falta. We'll give you the remaining minute. It just blows me away still that they wrote over the emulsion of the image, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then if you go back and look at the first photo that I put up from the archive, they actually hand wrote the word out over 2 of their names. Yeah. And then a rock band in Bogota picked up somehow read the article, asked me if they could use the photograph as as the cover for their album art, and made some music. It's not my type of music, but they made music.
Las bananas son en importancia la tercera cosecha de Colombia. A 95 centavos por racimo en la bananera producen $10 millones para propietarios y empleados.
The word out, and there's the word out. You get the idea. And then it gets harder from there, the music. So then think the 90th anniversary of the massacre was coming up. And this history professor at the Universidad Nacional in Colombia, Mauricio Archila, he invites me down to give a lecture on the massacre. He had read this article and he said, come join us. We're going to do 2 days on this, and we're going to bring some people that are from the zone, some other historians, and we're going to talk about the 1928 massacre, commemorate and whatnot. So we prepared a small exhibition there in the university based on that article. I worked with my good friend Fidel Peña, who he's a brilliant graphic designer based here in Toronto. Underline Studio is the name of his studio. Anyway, we worked on it. But I was like, all right, people are interested in this massacre. There seems to be a story around this photo that people are sort of taken in by. What if we went to the banana zone and just see if this could be a film? And so I hired a PhD student from Colombia, and he's a documentary filmmaker. We got a camera, he had a camera. We went up to the banana zone, and my idea was, let's find the sites that are mentioned in Cortes Vargas's memoirs and that occur in the Harvard collection, in that photograph collection. So we went to Sevilla, we went to Santa Marta, we went to Cienega, we went to all these places and we filmed, 5-6 days. Meanwhile, there are these commemorations going on, high school students. Oddly enough, USAID was sponsoring these high school programs where these were memory programs, and doesn't take much money, like $1,000 or $500 to its students and the teachers to get some costumes and practice for a few days and then perform in the square. Anyway, these amazing popular memory commemoration activities were going on the whole time. And we got some amazing footage. I'll share some of it with you in a minute. And then we came back to Toronto. I came back to Toronto, and we started working to put together a first cut. In the meantime, I worked with UTM's library, the university library, on this digital humanities project called Visualizing the Americas. And so the idea was we would make these records, those stolen documents or liberated documents, available to researchers anywhere in the world for free, and we would tell this story so that high schoolers could understand it. And that's what we did. We created this project, Visualizing the Americas. And yeah, so it examines the history of capitalism through the production and consumption of a single commodity, the banana. High school students anywhere can sort of relate to a banana. They all have them on their kitchen counters. It also preserves endangered records that are integral to the history of these companies and the communities in which they operated. And so these collections are now available through UTM, University of Toronto Mississauga's library page, and researchers are using them all the time. There is, for our librarian friends here, it required a difficult negotiation between me and the library, because I had the idea that this should be a sexy website, a really beautiful website. And the librarians are like, yeah, that's a good idea, but we have to make sure this thing survives no matter what changes there are in technology. That material has to be stable and accessible to people going forward, even if after you've forgotten about this project. So we had this back and forth between me and the UTM library, and I think in the end we settled on a pretty good compromise. It turned out to be a beautiful website that's also very stable and available to anyone in perpetuity. This is just one example of the kinds of records that are available. Again, you see they were categorizing their labor force along the lines of race. Loads and loads of documents that we've made available. Then this thing got picked up. My article thing got picked up by the Colombian Truth Commission. So I was like, all right, there really is a reason to try to make this story into something that could reach a Colombian audience. And so we produced a first cut. My first rule was it should not look like I made it. It should not look like a historian made it. It should look like a film, right? It should not be an essay up on the screen, very pedagogical and No, it should be a film. It should speak the language of film. It should be attractive as a film. It should be internally coherent as a film. And so this was our first cut. We still had the title I liked. We filmed in a dark room in Colombia. I came up with sort of 3 things we were trying to do, and this was not in the language of film. This was sort of my academic speak. But Stolen Photo would harness the archives of the United Fruit Company to make visible the techniques of a corporation and to commemorate lives and futures cut short. It would try to render visible the techniques of the corporation, and problematize the relationship between photography and memory, between physical violence and archival violence, reconstruction and commemoration. Because what I was most interested in was the story of the massacre had already been told. I was interested in the way that the physical violence mutated into archival violence and mutated into blocks in memory so that people in Colombia could no longer remember this crucial event in their own history. They could only misremember it. And one massacre was another, and it all just gets jumbled up, and there's no distinctiveness to it anymore. And there's a figure on the Colombian far right who denied that the massacre even happened. So it became important, too, just to establish the basic historical record and put it out there so that the facts of the matter could not be denied. Or they could, but there would always be a way to answer back because you have the documents. And so here's a bit of what we did in the first cut. We hired this brilliant illustrator named Clay Rodri. And here my idea was, bear with me, but photography has a sort of indexical trace to the moment in which the photograph is taken. What that means is there's a kind of causal connection between the clicking of the button and the person or whatever that was in front of the camera in the moment when light bounced off that person, went in through a hole into a little black box that had some chemicals smeared on some film in the back and changed that film. That photograph is a record of a moment, a slice of that past moment that you can refer to. Whereas an illustration clearly is not, right? An illustration is not causally connected to that moment in the past. It's instead imagined, right? And I wanted the film to do that. I wanted it to move between the indexical record, the archive, the documents, and the imagination of the viewer. And so with this illustrator, we reconstructed some of the moments in the past, but clearly in this fictional idiom of of animation, if you will. There's the photograph itself. This, you can barely see it, but this is the photo from the Harvard archive in Sevilla where the engineering quarters are being burnt down. And so I found this guy that still lives in the house that's back here. Remember I mentioned the optical unconscious of this photo? The guy that I'm going to show you a clip from, he lives in this house. That was where his parents lived and his grandparents lived. It's inside it's called the American Zone, the United Fruit Company houses where the management lived. And right in front of their house was this engineering quarters. You can pick it out from the architecture of that house. So you can't read it, it's too small.
Soy gringo, sacó una carabina y de acá para le metió un tiro aquí. Mató a Poneramo Coronel. Nosotros que se dieron cuenta que ya estábamos.
So what he's doing is he's telling the story of how Erasmo Coronel, the guy wearing the bow tie in this photograph, this guy, he's telling the story how this guy was killed here. And this was insane. His house, he lived in this complete nostalgia. They never took out the United Fruit Company furniture. They didn't take out the United Fruit Company crockery, the china. It all had the old logo on it. The silverware, you saw that in the still. They had all the United Fruit Company silverware. They lived in this sort of Benjaminian nostalgia. They were just stuck in the past. And here's the picture from Harvard's collection. Anyway, I go back 4 years later with money to make a real film, and the dude is telling me the official story that it's not that interesting. It was great when he was telling the story that he just told to his family and his friends, and that's what we got in the first version of the film. Okay, those are clips from the memorandum. Number 5 was killed in the fighting in Sevilla. The last bit was to use capitalism's own images as resources for expanding human freedom and rebuilding the commons. I think the photo, here's a clip. Here's a clip from the first cut of the film. These are the school kids putting on demonstrations or reenactments of the 1928 massacre. This is in Ciénaga, where the massacre actually took place in 28.
Nada, no nos comentaban nunca.
She's a banana plantation worker now.
Él era, parcero.
I asked her, what do you remember about the 1928 massacre? She says nothing. No.
¡Te queda un minuto para desocupar el patio! ¡Un minuto! ¡Vamos! ¿Tú escuchaste algo de la masacre de la bananera?
No,
No, ¿nunca escuchaste nada?
nunca.
Nunca. ¿No sabes qué es eso ni nada?
No, escuché a las viejos que estaban hablando de ella. Creo que fue en el ¿qué? 998.
¿Y de qué se trata? ¿Qué escuchaste de eso?
No, prácticamente mucho, ¿no?
¿No?
Escuché, pero yo creo que ni cuando eso no, ni pensamiento de ellos haber nacido, no, nada. No me acuerdo, no he escuchado nada de eso.
Right, so
¿De dónde viene el silencio?
where's the
El
silence
pueblo
come
se
from?
llenó de terror, se llenó de miedo. Y
That's a woman named Margarita Bonet, and I can tell you a lot about these different people, but she, when we went back with money last April to actually film in the right way, she had just declined cognitively so much since we were there 6 years before. And so we still interviewed her. She's this brilliant, amazing older woman who's been part of this community and the pop collective memory for decades. But there was a sort of vacant look in her eyes, and all that lucidity that we got in 2018 from her, it was really hard to get it again. And so in the second version of the film that makes it onto Colombian television and everything, we had to use her words sometimes from 2018, but her image from the present, because, anyway. So the co-production. The first version of the film was pretty good, but we broke every single rule about making a film. Like, those images that I just showed you, I didn't have permission. Like, I mean, we asked people, okay, can we film? Yeah, you can film, so we filmed. But we didn't get them to sign releases like the library made me sign before I came up here. And we should have, because then 6 years later, we want to use this film, we want it to appear on TV, and there are all these people there that have not given us the right to use their image. So none of that footage could we use. And that was heartbreaking. Señal Colombia is the broadcaster, the public broadcaster in Colombia. It reaches like 97% of Colombia's territory. It's the equivalent of our CBC or the PBS in the United States. and they put about $56,000 US into it to finish the film. It enabled me to work with this amazing Colombian team of producers, film, photographers, set designers, actors, sound designers, editors, and this is what we came up with. This is just the trailer.
Mi nombre es Raúl Eduardo Maecha y nací en 1884.
Curiosamente, Maecha no ha recibido mucha atención biográfica y es un personaje clave, sobre todo en esos años.
So the only thing I could do was basically take out, few enough letters that no one would seize them, and I took them out slowly, visit by visit, whatever I could fit under my shirt.
O sea, es una huelga, ellos paran, lo que hacían los trabajadores era bloquear la vía.
Aparece en la obra de ficción, porque 100 años de soledad es una obra de ficción, que incorpora dentro de su mundo ficcional este evento de la realidad, de la historia de Colombia.
The attached photograph shows 5 of the principal leaders in the recent disturbances in the Colombian division. Their names are as follows. Number 1, and it's referencing this photo that was attached to it with a paperclip.
Ellos pedían y pedían hasta que dijeron, vámonos a la huelga, les damos 5 minutos para que se retiren. La gente no se movió. José Arcadio II levanta la voz y dice, cabrones, les regalamos el minuto que falta.
Eran solo 9 puntos, decía él. ¿Qué costaba? Asesinar un obrero por cada punto del tren.
Las personas que aquí mataron, las embarcaron en el mismo ferrocarril, como si fueran racimos de banano.
¿Cuántos había? El número no se sabe exactamente.
So then this is just a photo of us filming on location. This is my friend Fidel Peña, the guy from Underline Studio here in Toronto. He's a Colombian photographer, brilliant guy. There were a couple of us. The monologue. We didn't have a way for the whole film to kind of be stitched together, right? It was hard to tell this. Like, I'm telling you guys, there's this story of archival violence, there's a story of an actual massacre, there's a story of a dude stealing a bunch of documents. And there are all these different collections. There's one at Harvard, there's one now at the University of Toronto, and then there are the Colombian records and the US declassified documents. How do you tell that story on film without losing your viewer? And so Fidel came up with this brilliant idea. He's like, Kevin, can you come over for dinner tomorrow night? I have an idea. And so he's like, took me into the kitchen. He's like, we should do a monologue. And I'm like, yeah, we should do a monologue. And so together, I was like, all right, then let's get somebody to play Maecha. And so we cast for an actor that looked like Maecha, and this guy magically kind of looked like Maecha. If you're from Colombia, you'll note that his accent is not at all from that region of Colombia, but those are details. And so we give this guy a monologue, and then we can stitch the whole film together in these different episodes. And my idea was the guy should actually come out of the photograph and go back into the photograph, the beginning and the end of the film. This is the end of the film.
Un movimiento masivo, pero sin fotos, que hubieran permitido a las masas ver imágenes de sí mismos actuando concertadamente. Destellos de ametralladora. Recuerdos de una masacre escrita sobre cuerpos y mentes, pero no en el papel fotográfico. Una fotografía con números escritos sobre ella. Y un memorándum que se lee como una lista de blancos. Cuerpos desaparecidos, bajo la cubierta de la oscuridad. Archivos con miles de fotos,
pero ninguna de la huelga. Estos son los mecanismos con los que la violencia soberana constituyó un campo de visión.
So it gets a little heavy here. It's lighter for most of the film. I think I'll skip past this. I don't want to bore you. But so how has this thing been received? It was aired on Colombian Public Television in September, and it was the most viewed film on public television during that month. And then it gets picked up by news people because the Chiquita Banana, United Fruit Company, was found guilty in a U.S. court in Florida of paying a right-wing paramilitary group $2 million. And that right-wing paramilitary group, with Chiquita's money, ended up killing several labor leaders. And this is in recent history. And the court just found Chiquita guilty about a year and a half ago. So this is not the past. This is the same company with a different name, but the same company producing the same beautiful big yellow bananas, engaging in labor practices in the 2010s that are very similar to the labor practices it was using in the 1920s. So news people end up picking up the film, and they bring in lawyers to talk about the recent judgment against Chiquita. They use clips from the film. They get some things right, they get some things wrong, but they're basically using it as I had hoped it would be used. It's a part of a public debate and a discussion in which the past and present collide, and you start to see both a little bit differently. I'll just play you a second of this.
Hace 96 años, según la obra de García Márquez, comenzó a llover en Macondo. Y porque en la vida real, ayer fue el aniversario de la primera masacre de las bananeras en Colombia, de la que un antropólogo norteamericano encontró constancias inéditas en una bodega abandonada en Costa Rica.
El 6 de diciembre de 1928,
so they're taking clips from the film, they're telling the story from the film, and then I'll end it with, I think we're doing really well on time. Here's one last story. I was invited to screen this film in New York a couple of weeks ago, and I was staying with my friend Jaime, and he starts looking on YouTube to find out if the film's available, and he comes up and he finds this thing where that very far-right politician, Maria Fernanda Cabal, is denying that the massacre occurred. And she's like, Gabriel Garcia Marquez is exaggerated. And what I understood is actually it was the workers that killed the soldiers, not the soldiers that killed the workers, right? Saying all this stuff and just, it's everywhere. And this guy took the film and then he did something highly illegal, but I approve of it. He basically recorded the film and used it as a rebuttal to Maria Fernanda Cabal. And who cares about copyright? He was basically using the film to show the facts of what actually happened in Colombia in 1928 and to dispute her conspiratorial account. So I guess one object, this photograph, can spark something for some of us, and that's just sort of my story of working with this photo. Thanks for coming out tonight. That's it. I don't know, James.
Are there any questions that we can take some questions right now, both in person and online?
Yeah.
Where can we see this film from?
We signed a distribution deal with a company named Cinema Guild. I haven't actually turned the stuff over to them because I've been too busy doing something else. But soon enough, it'll be available through libraries and other places. So yeah, thank you for asking. I guess stay tuned. If you're if you're in a university, hopefully it'll be available through most university libraries soon, and maybe public libraries as well. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, in regards to the last story that you said about the politician in Colombia.
Yeah.
What did she say after she saw the film?
I don't think she said anything. I'm not sure we can change her mind, but at least, you know, there are a lot of people out there who at least have another version of what happened.
So, sorry, just to interrupt, if you don't mind rephrasing the question so those that are online can hear you.
So somebody in the back asked, where can we see the film? And then the second question was, how did Maria Fernanda Cabal, the right-wing politician that denied this massacre happened, how did she respond after this person on YouTube put up the film as a rebuttal to what she had said? And the answer to the first question was, a distributor named Cinema Guild will eventually bring it out to universities and public libraries and theaters, but just not yet. And the second question was, I don't think she saw it or responded.
Do you know how much involvement the U.S. government had in that massacre? Because, of course, they were always pointing the shots in Latin America.
Yeah. So the question was, do you know how much involvement the U.S. government had in the massacre? We know from the declassified documents that the U.S. government was monitoring everything very carefully. The U.S. government supported the United Fruit Company, but the United Fruit Company was strong enough, powerful enough, and the Colombian military was powerful enough that those two actors on their own could do quite a lot. So just, I guess, the U.S. government did put a warship off of Santa Marta. That it did. I don't know that it did anything more than that. I think just made itself visibly there as a possible threat to, and the threat was credible. The U.S. had, the Marines had occupied Nicaragua, they had occupied Cuba. So yeah, so it was a real, a credible threat, but they didn't end up docking. And
Were they in Cuba too, the United Fruit Company?
Yeah, they sure were. Through the tropical parts of Latin America and the Caribbean, yes. Fidel Castro nationalizes some United Fruit Company land after 1959.
So you mentioned earlier in the presentation how there was a difference in numbering between the official company's accounts with Bradshaw versus the Colombian military's difference in numbers.
Yeah.
Have you done any questioning into the significance of that? If maybe there was a difference in interest in these figures between the company versus the military, or if, I mean, even using these as, I guess, showing intent on the part of the military with the way they numbered them and how events had turned out?
So the question was the different numbering schemes for the same photograph. Have I looked into why they were numbered differently, how they were numbered differently? Is that, yeah? No. I mean, other than what I've said, where I surmise that they were sitting across from each other, this penmanship is Thomas Bradshaw's. The word out is obviously a word in English, so I really think I'm not going out on a limb. He attaches it to a memo he wrote. He has the same check marks on that memo. There's a paperclip mark here, and then you saw the ripped memo from the paperclip there. The writing on the photo that appears in Cortes Vargas's memoir is a very different kind of penmanship. It's, I think, Cortes Vargas's own penmanship. Is there a way to confirm that? No, but I think it's a pretty reasonable guess.
We have a comment from online. It just says, I want to say that your work is amazing and inspiring. Just trying to see if there's anything else that came up.
Yes, there is a question online. So regarding the documents that were smuggled out, were they left in an abandoned site or were they meant to be better guarded?
Good question. They were, so everyone heard the question because you said it, right? Yeah. They were on the United Fruit Company's land. They were in a United Fruit Company warehouse. The Wachiman, they called him, was, I guess, the guard. So he was guarding them. But the fruit company, probably for its own, the racial logic that it worked on, it just assumed this white man anthropologist must be, like, agree with them on everything, you know, like on segregation, on the dividing your labor force along the lines of race and ethnicity. And the anthropologist didn't. And he saw in the documents something they did not see. So I don't think the documents were technically, yes, guarded and protected. That's it. That's all I can say. Yeah.
So what happened in the end then? There was a massacre, there was some burning of buildings.
Yeah.
And retaliation.
Yeah.
Then did that quash the uprising then, and everyone went back to work, or you lost a ton of workers? Then what happened? So.
Right. So the question was, so what happened in the end? You got a massacre. You've lost a ton of workers. Did it squash the strike or the rebellion? And what happened next, right? So yeah, the banana zone, when the workers were on strike and before the massacre, who governed there really was it was not settled. The merchants, middle-class people that own their own small stores and throughout the banana towns and plantation towns and villages, they were actually supporting the striking workers. Even wealthier Colombians in that zone were supporting the striking workers. The violence of the 6th of December reverses the strike. It's what we might call law-making violence. And then after that, the old order where the state had complete control over that region, or the company, because the company almost worked like a state within a state, and it could, one of the crucial things that I skipped over with for time was that the 9 demands that the workers made, they were all appealing to labor laws already on the books in Colombia. So the idea that these were radical demands, communists trying to create a revolution, is just absurd. Maybe some of them had heard of communism, had heard of the Bolsheviks or whatever, but these people were saying, a right to a day of rest, a right to decent housing, and they were citing Colombian law number, 14 from 1926, whatever. But you get the idea. They were essentially asserting Colombian sovereignty and saying the company could not just do whatever it wanted. It had to obey Colombian law. The violence of December 6th reverses that. The company can then do what it wants to do. And it creates a hole in memory. That law-making violence of killing workers at night on December 6th morphs into law-preserving violence, where it gets transformed in the archive. So the only thing that's documented afterward is worker violence, not the violence of the state. It creates a misremembered past where you get present-day banana plantation workers who say, like, oh yeah, when did it happen? Yeah, 1996. Yeah. No, I was too young at 1996. I don't know what happened, right? You get this kind of oblivion. And so, to some extent, you could argue that la violencia, the violence of Colombia, it happens then where the state and the company refuse dialogue, refuse to negotiate with the workers, and then the center is killed, and the only way to resolve conflict becomes through violence. So there were efforts, a famous Colombian politician, Jorge Eliezer Gaitan, goes and interviews people after survivors of the massacre. He interviews all of these people and gets firsthand accounts of what happened. he becomes hugely popular in Colombia as a politician. He's going to probably win the presidency, and then he's assassinated. And so what happened is that mechanism of using violence rather than negotiation, it becomes more of a pattern. Yeah. So the question was, in your research on these 5 men, did you find out what they did? Like, what did they help unionize? What concretely did they do? This guy was, not the actor, but the real guy, was wounded in the leg. He was shot in the leg. This guy's killed. This guy serves a sentence of 14 years in a penitentiary. This guy I don't know. This guy I don't know. So one of the difficulties of doing Latin American history is just access to sources. And so I found out a lot of what I know from power itself, from the general in charge of the operation. He happens to write a fair amount about this guy and this guy. And then there are the Gaitan interviews. I get some of that. Then there are the newspaper records. And there are a few other sources that I'm able to use. There's a historian named Mauricio Archila who does some really good work in Colombia. And so from all these sources, I can begin to put together a picture of these two. Little fragments about him, but these two just appear as names. And unfortunately, if somebody else finds more documents, that'd be great. But what did they concretely do? They brought a printing press from Barranca Bermeja, an oil town on the Caribbean of Colombia coast. And they had worked in strikes in the oil fields before, 1926, earlier. So they brought a printing press, and they printed pamphlets and other things that helped organize the workers. The printing press, the company and the military destroyed their printing press. They didn't like that the workers were distributing news. The military tried to prevent the Colombian press from reporting on events, but these workers were trying to get news out. So that's what they did, mainly that printing press. These guys were also, Erasmo Coronel, Bernardino Guerrero, and Nicanor Serrano were representatives of the workers. They were delegated by the workers. He came from Barranca Bermeja, but I suspect that these other guys were, well, actually I know for a fact he was from the Banana Zone, Sevilla, and I think these other 3 were as well.
I am thinking of what happened to the other documents in that warehouse, because you mentioned the guy, the anthropologist, smuggled 2 boxes, right?
Yeah.
And I imagine there were many other sources, and that United Fruit Company must have not been happy with what happened. So did they destroy them? Are they still there? Do we have news about this? What happened to these sources?
So the question was, what happened to the rest of the documents? This anthropologist, Philippe Bourgois, takes out 2 boxes worth of documents. What happened to the thousands of others? I don't know. I think they're probably destroyed. Yeah, I think they're destroyed.
Yeah, kind of following up on that question. I mean, whether it's kind of you're saying, oh, they were stolen, oh, they were liberated. I mean, this work wouldn't really be possible without someone having taken those. Has there ever been any kind of response from Chiquita about this? I mean, you said the anthropologist couldn't access the documents in America. Was there attempts at litigation against that, or even kind of just an outright denial of, we're not looking at that, that's a property we don't have time for?
The question is, okay, these documents were either liberated from the company or stolen from the company. Did Chiquita ever respond? Did they ever try to sue the anthropologist that took them? Or, before we made the film, I asked the University of Toronto, and we met with their main lawyer. This dude studied at Yale. He's super duper lawyer. And he said, you don't have to worry about it. the United Fruit Company, Chiquita, does not want the bad press that'll come from shining a light on a documentary film. So use the documents. You have a right to information. This is all based on archival research. It's all footnoted. This is not slander. These are the actual records of the company. So it's in the public interest to share this information. And so there's a public interest defense for using these documents, even if the company did not give us permission to. I think we've probably reached our time, no? Is there, have we, or is there?
We have reached our time.
Okay, great. Thanks, folks. So.